American Community Media Briefing. I'm Pilar Marrero, Associate Editor at ACOM, and your moderator for today. Thank you to all the journalists joining us from ethnic and community media outlets across the country. As always, our audience today includes reporters representing a wide range of communities and media formats nationwide. Today's conversation is about humor and why it matters, especially in difficult times. In moments when the news can feel overwhelming, unsettling, or even frightening, humor often helps people process what is happening around them. Comedy and satire can challenge power, make sense of chaos, and sometimes helps us laugh at what scares us the most. Humor can also be empowering. It gives people a sense of agency when events feel out of their control, and it creates connections across communities. That may be the reason satire has historically drawn such strong reactions from people in power. Throughout history, comedians and satirists have often been among the most persistent critics of authority. Today, we're joined by three people who have spent their careers using humor to comment on culture, politics, and the human condition. Our panelists today are Herbert Sigüenza, artist in residence at San Diego State University Arts Alive, and a founding member of the legendary Latino performance troupe Culture Clash, which for decades has used satire and theater to explore politics, culture, and identity. Emil Amok Guillermo, journalist, humorist, and poet laureate, whose work blends political commentary, journalism, and satire across multiple media platforms. And Samson Koletkar, co-founder of the Desi Comedy Fest, the largest South Asian comedy festival in the United States, and founder of Comedy Oakland. Thank you all for joining us today. Okay, let's start with the big picture question. As we all know, we're living through a moment when the news can feel overwhelming or even destabilizing. What role does humor play in helping people process uncertainty or fear? And I'm going to give you a top 2 minutes each to give me your take on that. Herbert? Hello?
Herbert's on mute.
Somebody's on mute? Hold on. Herbert, you're on mute. You are on mute.
Maybe he's telling a joke.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
And you missed my big joke introduction.
Oh shoot. Okay.
No, but okay. Let me get my 2 minutes back.
Right.
Thank you for having us. I'm a co-founder of Culture Clash. We're a satirist, a Chicano comedy group. And this is what we do this is what we do every day is use comedy as a solve, as a antibiotic against the sadness in the world, right? But humor is always a part of our culture. In fact, I'm going to a funeral right now, right? And there'll always be, but although it's sad, there'll always be somebody who comes up to the altar, right, and says something funny, right? Almost always there's somebody, either people come up sad. There's two types of people. Either they come up sad or they come up with a joke to break the ice, and everyone needs that, right? As a release. You're sad, but you need to laugh. You need to laugh about and celebrate that person's life, right? And so I think humor is just part of our culture. It really is our savior to what's going on in the world, and that could be death itself,
All right. Okay. Let's move on to Emil. What's your take on that, Emil?
Well, here's the thing. Humor comes out of pain. Humor comes out of tension. And when it's so tense and the pain is so real and so just so, it's just too much, that's the perfect moment for humor. And that's why, when the tension goes up, someone's, solicits or elicits a joke, and then you get the biggest laugh. It's the antidote to all of that. And that's why, as a journalist, I've been a journalist for 50 years. And the thing is, humor has always been in the toolkit, but I was never a professional jokester or comedian. I was a journalist, and I was trying to get at the truth. I always use, I've always used this idea, the Mary Poppins theory, sugar a spoonful of sugar helps medicine go down. And I have always tried to use humor to engage in my columns a little bit, because not too much, because I'm still ultimately telling a truth, a serious truth. But in these times, I've turned more to humor as a comedian and as a purveyor of comedy and one-man shows, because we need it more. Because as a journalist, I can't be so objective. I can't put on the full-body condom and look out and feel like I can't be impregnated by what I'm seeing. I can't be the professional voyeur, right? I have to get in there and I have to comment. And that means I don't cross the line, but it means I'm in the opinion side of journalism. And it means, and that's the side where you really, that's where we're at now. We need the laughs more now. But here's the problem. Humor is subjective. I might say something like I did the other day. I was doing a stand-up routine and I was doing my bad Trump impersonation. And I'll tell that joke later. But, I've never felt imposter syndrome like I did when I was giving my bad Trump impersonation, right? And so I'm telling my Trump joke and I say, look, as a comedian, I bomb, but I can't bomb as hard as that guy.
Mm.
And, all right, do you laugh? Do you cry? It's like 4 days after the bombing started. And I don't think people really get it yet. I think people are still trying to understand that we are in some deep doo-doo now. They don't get it. They'll see the gas prices go up. They'll see it affecting their lives. And they'll say, yeah, I need some. They didn't know how to react. But that's the job of the comedian satirist, to poke the holes at what the big bubble that we're living in, and to try to get at the truth, at what's real. That's the value of humor right now. But as I said, humor is subjective, and I have some answers about how to bridge that subjectivity as we go on in our conversation.
All right. Thank you, Emil. Samson?
Hey everyone. Everybody's talking about jokes and humor in comedians. I'll start with the news media because one of my favorite quotes is if you don't follow the news, you are uninformed. If you do follow the news, you're misinformed. And I find that very I find that very interestingly honest. And I know I'm saying this in front of an entire Zoom room of news people.
I was
But
just going to say.
yes, but that again is what we are talking about, right? Like for comedians, we see things and we say things. Somehow that filter is not in our brains. So that is I think the big distinction is humor is agreement. If I tell a joke and you laugh, it's because you agree with me. And if you don't agree, you don't laugh. And that agreement is a very instant thing. You can't plan for it. So a lot of people are thinking the things that we say out loud, and then the shock and the humor comes from the fact that somebody actually said it out loud. So it's not that we are thinking something different than everybody else. We just structure the idea into words and we portray it. And if you guys agree and connect, then you laugh. And if you disagree and don't connect, then the comedian goes back in and figures a way to make it more connectable, improve the way they say things. I also have a secondary take on comedians. Sometimes they try to put themselves too high up on the horse, like we are the truth speakers. It's like only as long as people are laughing. When they don't, you change your truth a little bit as well. So don't be that high on your own horse. Everybody's on the same playing field.
Hey, but Samson, sometimes we're beyond laughter. Sometimes it's not the laughs we're going for. And that's why there are some comedians that it's always about the laugh. And sometimes for satirists, it's just about popping the big bubble, pricking
Yeah.
and going for the truth. So it becomes a little more nuanced. But you're right. If they don't laugh, you're saying, "Am I good? Am I terrible?" And this is why the humor that's subjective, that gives you the opportunity to maybe to get to a more nuanced debate, maybe to get to the discussion that serious news people are trying to get at, but you get at it through comedy. I say the jokes are kind of like a recalibration. I agree with you. The news is the setup. What is the punchline? And the punchline is the joke, and maybe that's the recalibration to get us back on the same path. And that's what makes, you know, the most basic humor is the pratfall, right? Falling down, the well-timed fart joke. But sometimes, there's a range, there's a spectrum of humor, and a skilled comedian like you are uses both, right? The simple, the easy stuff, plus the hard stuff. Like yesterday when Christy Nome was was fired. How many people heard, "Oh, all the dogs are cheering now," right? I mean, that was sort of like that's like surface right at the level, right? But I
Endless
added,
memes about that. Endless
yeah,
memes about that on social media, by
yeah,
the way.
yeah. And I add, well, what about the goats? The goats too are cheering. The goats too are cheering. Or maybe Donald Trump gave her the option. You can self-deport or you can go to a quarry and self-execute. So
Our role, I think our role as comics is that we're outsiders, like journalists, right?
hmm,
We're on the objective side, so we can make both. We can make fun of the right and left. I think
hmm,
that should be our role. That we're just the outsiders commenting back on the ridiculousness of everything, right? Of course, we take it another notch, but I think that's what I like about being a comic is that you're outside the societal, morality and norms and all that, just a little bit. There's always timing. You're right. Timing is very, a joke might work today, but if it's
yeah,
too close, I love when people say too soon, right? But that's subjective. Yeah, that's subjective, right? Too
yeah,
soon for you, maybe, but not for me,
yeah, yeah. Hey, Herbert, I want to agree with you that we're objective. We are to a degree like journalists, but I think at some point, and this is, you got to take a side. I
Yeah,
think at some point, and this is where, as a journalist, I don't get away with too many jokes when I'm writing a straight story. But when I write a column, okay, now I can tell you, my Christy Nome,
yeah.
the easy, oh yeah, all the dogs are cheering and the goats too. But it's this is why there's a spectrum of where you stand in the comedy world. And if you're Jay Leno, you want to say I'm equal opportunity offender, right?
Right, right.
But the fact is, you just want to get the laughs. Okay, that's kind of corporate comedian. But people who are of a culture, like you talk about Mex, Latino culture. I talk about Filipinos and Asian, and Samson talks about Desi comedy. We're all kind of, this is almost like the balkanization of comedy in some ways, right? Because I go to a Filipino comedy festival and I say, "Oh, lumpia," and I tell lumpia jokes, right? And
Right.
I do it to a white crowd, and they say, "Well, I don't know. Can
Well,
you
yeah,
say
what is
egg?
Olympia? Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. Can you say egg roll, Emil?
No, it is not the same.
Yeah, not the
We
same.
used to, yeah, we used to have a comedy show on Fox, and the producer says, I've noticed that every time you say carne asada, you get a laugh.
Right. Hey, hey, when
You put carne asada anywhere in a joke, and people will laugh.
I did that Olympia joke. It was
Yeah,
about being in a Filipino Beatles tribute band, and I said, "I want to hold your lumpia,"
yeah.
and they said, Filipinos laughed at it. But I did that in New York, and a white guy came up to me and said, "Oh, when you said I want to hold your lumpia, that was a maybe it's because I also did this kind of gesture. I
Oh
want
yeah,
to
yeah.
hold your lumpia."
Double entendre.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So
I think we
yeah.
all got that one. Okay. All right.
That's
Okay, guys.
universal. Yeah, that movement is universal.
Yes,
Okay, I had a bunch of questions, but there's a bunch of questions in the chat, so I'm gonna start taking some. Nestor Fantini from Hispanic LA. Do you want to ask your question, Nestor?
Okay, okay. Yeah, a very simple question. Considering the political climate that we're facing and all the challenges that American institutions are facing, do you feel the pressure? Do you self-censor sometimes?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Anyone?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go. Just
I,
go.
I think here's the thing. You write your jokes, humor is subjective, and you get out there and it's a different crowd. And I think all comedians go through a kind of self-censorship sometimes. Like I was going to say a joke about pedophilia. And because Epstein and all that, it's kind of it's somewhat relevant. I can make a joke about it, or can I? And then I get the sense of the crowd, and I self-censor. Um, when it's about talking about Trump, I don't self-censor. So I don't know how the other guys feel, but I think self-censorship does come in, and you really feel free when when you're in an audience in a situation that will laugh and join you, and then hey, I'm dancing, and Ginger Rogers has showed up, and we can dance.
Samson?
So I'm assuming you're asking this question, or we are addressing this in a public forum, right? Like if I'm out at a comedy club or a comedy venue, not in a private gig, because there's a lot of
No.
self-censorship when we do private gigs. But in the public forum, personally, no. And one of the reasons I do not self-censor is I don't think I'm big enough to worry about the consequences. I think if I get to a point where there will be a backlash and there will be consequences, then comes the real question of how much do you self-censor? And fortunately or unfortunately, I haven't had that problem yet. So for me, comedy is a medium of expressing my thoughts and observations and beliefs and ideas. And even if it sounds wrong, I will say it out loud. And it does sometimes take a few iterations, like I said before, where I might say something the first time doesn't come out right. I understand that my message is not conveyed the way I intended it to be. So I'm going to tweak the message, but that doesn't mean I'm censoring myself. But at some point, as a comedian, if it just does not land and if it doesn't connect with the audience, I drop the joke. And I don't think that's of that as self-censorship. It's about maximizing my comedian presence on stage. So uh, I think comedians are born out of a rebellious state of mind. If you don't want the comedians, if you ever tell a comedian not to say something, that is exactly what they will talk about. So the golden rule is don't tell the comedian what not to do, because that is exactly what we will do. And I think that is what troubles most people who try to shut comedians down, right? All the censorship comes from the comedians are saying things that you should not be saying. And the minute you say you should not be saying, we're going to say more about it because now it's a battle.
It's a challenge now. Herbert, what about backlash? Did Culture Clash ever get backlash or censorship?
Oh, Herbert muted again.
You're muted again. Probably told another joke. Unmute.
Hey,
Okay.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm back.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, I get upset when I censor myself, and I'm very impulsive, like say on Facebook, I'll put something up right away that I'm reacting to, and that's kind of that's my therapy, and that's my truth at that time. And yeah, people might get upset, and they get upset, and that makes me come back and go, are they right or not? You know what I'm saying? Then I reevaluate what I just said. And sometimes I'll stick to my guns, and sometimes I'll put the post down because, I came to the realization that, yeah, maybe that's too soon, or that's too offensive, or it's too political, whatever. But yeah, I will censor myself after I analyze it myself.
Yeah, Herbert,
I
the thing is, we all want to be liked too. We want to
Yeah, exactly.
polarize in a good way, but we
Yeah,
want to be liked and loved, right? The humor, the comedian, when he goes out into a crowd, is asking for the crowd's love, right?
yeah. That's
And
ultimately that's what we
approval.
want. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're balancing it, but I agree with Samson. I don't censor myself, but I'm trying to carve it to make people love me, make strangers love me, which is another 1 hour session of why comedians do what they do, to get love from strangers, out in public. So
I'll add another comment because I think that it also addresses some of the questions I see down the chat is who decides what can and cannot be acceptable? Right now, we're talking about political and people in political power shutting comedians down, but it's not just them, right? We're talking about a funeral. Like I go to a funeral, I see the number of people there, and I'm sometimes thinking there are more people here than at some of my shows. And in this really, really dark moment, can I still crack a joke and make them laugh? Like that's a challenge to me now, right? And we joke about everything. There is no table off, there is no topic off the table. Nothing is off the limits. And there are people who will express ideas like, oh, you can't joke about this and you can't joke about that. And this may be just one member in the audience or somebody online commenting on a joke that I post. But whether they are in a position of power or not, they are trying to censor. And are we going to censor there? So the question is not just about censor from the top of the political power, but even in your day-to-day life. And I've said this to parents a lot. I have a lot of young comics who want to come and try stand-up. And I've had parents come to me and ask questions like, what guidance or what advice would you give these kids who are trying to do stand-up? And I tell them, I'm not going to give advice to the kids. I'm actually going to give you the advice that when your kid is trying to do jokes, a lot of times they'll falter and say the wrong thing at the wrong time. And you need to learn to accept that and give them the room to grow. If you're going to censor your own kid, don't expect them to become good comedians if you're going to keep chiding them every time they make a mistake. So a lot of times we tend to look at others as the problem. We don't realize we ourselves are part of the problem too. So to some extent, which is why I go back to, we think we sit outside and comment on the world, but we are a part of the world we are commenting on, which is why the best comedy comes from the place of truth. If you're speaking absolute truth, truth is stranger than fiction, that brings out the best comedy. And it's inclusive, right? It's about not just pointing something that you are doing wrong, but something that I am doing wrong along with you. And I'll give you a very small example because I also saw a comment about if the comedians can do some of their bits. This is not a whole routine, but the idea of, as a comedian, an ethnic or a minority comedian in America, I joke about how I sometimes get feedback from audience, and the feedback is, go back to where you come from, which is something I've only heard in America. Because in India, which like America is a multicultural, multi-ethnic country where people from different parts of the world have lived together for centuries, nobody ever tells you to go back to where you come from. But in India, they tell you to go to Pakistan. And that is my first big laugh or an opening joke because stupidity exists everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Over here, we cry foul, but then we act the same way when we go back home. So the hypocrisy is what makes it funny to me.
And
Yes.
that exposure, that hypocrisy, that's always at the core of, this week, Pete Hegseth said, "Oh, in war, we punch down, we punch down," and that's so an anti-comedic sense because in comedy we punch up, right? We punch up, and so I just think like Herbert said, he was at a funeral. I was at a funeral like 2 months ago for my brother-in-law, and I really did not like my brother-in-law that much initially, right? Because I'm a number two, second generation. He was the immigrant who came, married my sister, and I told my sister, "Look, we were born here. We don't have to import our spouses anymore. We don't have to go back home." And here's my brother-in-law's funeral, and so I go through this whole thing. By the way, I love funerals because I can, during the the what you call it, and they're not homilies, but
The wake.
I get to
The fiesta.
yeah, but I get to joke about the guy. And so here he is. I just laid it out. I hated this guy at first. I learned to love him. And look at in 2025, I saw him in ICU. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe. He knew something. He knew something as an immigrant. When you can't breathe he was checking out. He was checking out. And my brother-in-law was the perfect immigrant. I mean, job, career, 401k, and 50 years married to my sister. I mean, that makes him a perfect immigrant. And so, you find, even in death, you find a way to joke about the circumstances that are universal.
Yes.
That are universal.
Yes.
And you can, I'm sure, Herbert, your brother-in-law, I don't know if you like him as much as I loved mine, Samson, but, these are universal experiences, and there's room for humor. It lightened
Okay,
the
there's
day.
one question. I'm going to go with another question from the chat, and this is from
Yeah, they're good
Cesar.
questions.
Yeah, very good questions. Cesar Nukum asked me to ask the question for him. What are your reactions on the threats and intimidations on late night comedy shows like that of Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel by the administration and FCC Chairman Brendan Carr in particular?
What are our reactions to that kind of comedy?
No, to the intimidations and threats
To
from the
the
FCC.
talk show hosts.
Yeah, to the talk show host. I mean, they're very
Oh
high
yeah, that's
profile. So.
I mean that it's so obvious. I mean that's fascism 101. I mean that's you shut down the comedians first. The king would kill the court clown first.
Yeah,
He's the first. The court clown is the first guy to go because this guy had the liberty for a while to say anything he wanted, right, about the king, about his administration, and then suddenly he said something wrong, and the king doesn't like him. He's the first guy to go.
yeah, and
And
no
I
one
just think
notices.
that's so dangerous. It's so dangerous.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah. So this is where I think media comes in to play as well, right? Because while we talk about comedians facing the brunt, who's exposing all of this? It is the media who's doing it, which is why I keep saying, right? None of us is exclusively sitting separately outside and looking in. We are all in this together. So the way I find out about all these threats and intimidations that are happening to big name comedians is through media channels. Right? They are the ones coming up with, hey, here's what's going on. That's unacceptable. And now the media is pointing out the hypocrisy of the situation, and they're kind of playing their role as well. So it's that constant tiptoeing of who brings out the information in a way that's palatable to the audience, and whoever can do it in simplistic languages and universal words does it best, right? I think what connects everybody more easily is the truth. When there is lies and deceit, that's where you feel the disconnect because something's off. And so,
Yeah,
uh,
These late night comedians were not that funny. I mean, they were actually being very decisive and very critical of the administration,
Yes.
using very little humor. It was they were being real, right? They
yeah.
were being real, and I think that's when the administration said, okay, these guys are getting real. They're not being comics anymore, right? They're not being objective comics. They're being, they're against us, and that's when they started going after them.
Well, here's the real irony with Colbert, for example. Colbert, got canceled, and
Hmm.
for what he did, he's owned by Paramount, right? Meanwhile, South Park on Paramount Plus does their latest season. They have jokes like the Emir of Qatar comes in, offers a $400 jet to Trump, says the phrase that pays, "Mr. President, you do not have a small penis," and South Park gets away with that, and Colbert is getting canned. South Park gets away with things like Trump naked, small penis, impregnating Satan.
Mm.
I look at the
but you
latest
see
South
that
Park.
humor, but
Uh,
but you notice that humor is kind of pedantic. It's about penises, it's about this and that.
yeah,
I
but
think Corbett was talking about massacres, and I mean really like being
but yes, I know. Here's the thing. He's a comedian who wants to do journalism. I'm a journalism who wants to do comedy. And I appreciated South Park because what South Park did was just lay out the ridicule. It's just ridicule, right? And fascists, autocrats hate ridicule, which is why the ultimate lesson after this hour is watch more South Park. Watch more South Park.
And not late night shows. Okay. Another question from the chat. There are so many good ones. Rebecca Bartus, you want to ask your question? Rebecca Bartus?
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm curious, do comedy and humor function differently in ethnic communities where comedians may draw on cultural identity to comment on politics? And how might humor play a role in cultural storytelling or even cultural preservation for communities to express their experiences?
Well,
I'll I'll jump in here. One of the things that I used to say when I started the South Asian Comedy Festival was I had seen a lot of mainstream American comics talk about what their experience was with Indian culture. And to me, I would hear that and I'm like, that makes no sense. That's such a caricature that you're playing. Americans talking about Indian culture is like a marketing professor teaching about history, and you have no idea what our history is. And so it was very important for us to come out and speak our voices. What I also learned beautifully in my 17 years of running Comedy Oakland, where we have comedians from all kinds of backgrounds, is the more I heard diverse comedians, the more I realized we're all the same. We're all going through the same basic human problems. We all have problems with our family. We all have problems with our job. We all have problems with our cities. We all have, it's the same things, but we bring in a little different flavor to the jokes with our own little perspective. So there are certain very cultural quirks that are very strongly tied to your culture. So when I'm doing a South Asian show, there are certain jokes I can do which relate to them very well, like Emil was saying with his lumpia references. But then when we are trying to do, my goal again is, can I do the same jokes in every single audience and everybody should understand it? 99% of the time, yes, but there is always going to be some jokes that are very, very strongly rooted in your cultural identity that the culture gets better than others will. But yes, I do believe that more voices that come to the fore, the more you realize we are all kind of the same. I also have this little thing where you tend to hate or dislike people you don't know, but if you get to know them, you'll actually like them. But then if you get to know them really well, you'll find better reasons to hate and dislike them as individuals.
Anyone else want to chime in, Emil or Herbert?
Well, I do my current show, 69 Emil Amok. I I talk about being Filipino, and I talk about Filipino history, and I give them the Filipino lesson about 1898, the Spanish-American War, the Filipinos rose up, first democracy in Asia, 1899, the U.S.-Philippine War. Ask people how many people know about the U.S.-Philippine War. It's the first quagmire, right? It's a million deaths, and it was, and the Filipinos, of course, lost. And then ask them about the Buffalo Soldiers from, the black soldiers from America who came to the Philippines to fight for the U.S. And one black soldier, David Fagan, heard the F word or the N word, and he thought it was him, but they were talking the N word about the Filipinos. And so he switched sides and he deserted and led the Philippine army. So anyway, stories like that, you can talk about your history and it's funny and comedy. There's a way to bring in your storytelling telling to talk about family, to talk about history. And I try to do that in my shows, which aren't strictly stand-up comedy, more one-man show storytelling. But when I go to a club like I did with Samson the other night, I was just doing a 5-minute set and we're going for the laughs. But it's possible, and I think you're seeing more Desi comics, more Hispanic comics, or Latino comics, more Asian, Filipino comics. Just the algorithm will show you all the Filipino comics on Instagram. So
Yeah,
All
when we
right.
started, there was very few Latino comics, when we
mm,
started in the 80s, and now there's a lot, and they're really talking to that real niche audience, which is like, let's say it's a Latino that grew up here, that was born here, and so they have a second generation kind of type of comedy, a comedy that where they don't even know Spanish.
mm,
So,
yeah,
so you know what I'm saying? That's a specific kind of niche audience, American niche audience that they're reaching, and which is great, you
yeah,
know. But I come from a bilingual kind of tradition, I do, comedy in both languages, and that's yeah. But I can't do, I can't do Spanish everywhere. There's people
yeah,
that are Latino and they don't know Spanish.
yeah, yeah.
So I have to
True.
gear my comedy to them.
All right. Another question from the chat. Henrietta Burrows, ask your question, please.
Thanks so much, Pilar. It was mentioned that the joke connects when it's the truth, but not everybody agrees on what the truth is. So I'm wondering, in terms of the joke's appropriateness, and also if you've been booed because your audience didn't agree with you in terms of your truth, and did you change your style because of it? What effect did it have on you that you might have been booed?
It's a good
Hmm.
question.
Well, I told that joke about bombing, and it's still
And you
too.
bombed. You
Yeah, that
bombed.
about yeah. Well, I bombed. I was talking about Trump, as I never bomb as hard as him, and people were not. Some laugh, and we're still 4 days into the war when I told it, and it did affect me a little bit. But if you're out there performing, you know what your truth is, and you say it. To speak about truth, like I'll tell trans jokes. A lot of people don't like trans jokes, or it depends on what your perspective. I tell it from the perspective of a trans dad. A lot of people don't like Dave Chappelle because he tells trans jokes, and I think this is where you have to, as a comedian, you have to be absolutist in the First Amendment. That people have the right to say what they want to say, and they can say it, and we have the right to not hear or to go away or to leave, and that's the way to make it fair. I don't know how the
I
other
agree
guys
with you.
feel, but
I agree with you.
Yeah, I like that question from Henrietta. I saw that it also got an extra thumbs up, so there were at least two people thinking about this. And I speak purely as a comedian. The appropriateness of a joke is definitely a concern if you are trying to reach a wider audience, where
Yeah.
we can say all we want about I don't care what people think, I'm just going to speak my mind. But that's a comedian lying to themselves. We are always caring what people think because that laughter dictates whether I'm doing well or not. And the appropriateness is defined by the audience, right? And it's not just one show, because we are doing shows constantly. We are testing that joke out in different audiences, and we are looking for the majority to determine whether it's appropriate or not. And there are inappropriate jokes, anything that punches down. And it's a very fine line to differentiate between what punches up and what punches down. And that is a line that we're constantly tiptoeing and trying to figure out how far can I push it and still be acceptable. So the appropriateness of the joke for me personally is a big thing. If I'm trying to convey a point that offends people, then the point is lost. Comedy is subjective. Emil mentioned this right at the very beginning. So not 100 people or percent of people will agree with everything that I say, but that's you're playing the majority game right at that point and still trying to convey the points that you're trying to convey. And if you do it well, you generally succeed more. And if you don't, then you either work on making it right or keep struggling. So appropriateness is a huge part of comedy. And we will say inappropriate things in an appropriate way that still makes it funny. Because at the end of it, if you don't laugh, that to me is a signal that something is off.
Yeah.
Laughter determines, the audience decides, and that's the whole equation to me.
Now remember, just 1 second, Paul. Just remember, we are practitioners of comedy, and we tell jokes, and jokes are jokes. Where appropriateness really comes in as an issue is when people who aren't satirists, comedians, tell jokes that are inappropriate, and then people, that's when the ire goes up. When non-comedians, or your boss or your friend or the leader of a group tells an inappropriate joke, they shouldn't. But now, as a comic, if I tell something inappropriate, well, there's some more latitude, and also it's a joke, right, Sam? It's a joke. We're telling a joke.
I do agree. I've seen this happen with my friend group where a friend of mine will say something and everybody groans. And then 10 minutes later, the situation re-arises and I say the exact same things and everybody laughs. And then my friend's mad at me, like, how come you get a laugh while I get a groan? And there is a subtlety of timing and the way you say things that can change, and perceptions of people of how you are outside of your that moment of joke also determine whether you can or cannot get away with certain things.
Okay, there's a couple of questions in the chat that are similar, so I'm just gonna fuse them into the same one. Can comedy and satire help people better understand complex political issues?
Yes.
Can you guys help us understand what's going on right now? Talking about appropriateness and inappropriateness. I mean, there's so much inappropriateness going on in the world.
I think the example of South Park and other cartoons, right? Like if you really break it down, cartoon films can explain political geo-warfare, everything, etc., way better than any serious war general or any other person can. And there's something about that cartoonishness of simplicity that makes it easier. Of course, not everything is as simple. So we're trying to break it down into simplicity for people to grasp. And that is where humor is so good, because it simplifies a very complex thing, sometimes oversimplifies, but it at least simplifies a complex things to grasp it. And I know there's another question about, does it help in this situation? Absolutely, because at times we are all going through our own struggles and our own battles every single day outside of what's happening in the outside world. Comedy is a relief for a lot of people,
Relief.
right? And
Yeah.
you'll see this happen in a day-to-day situation where I know this. I was very impressed with my boss when I used to work in my tech job. He once invited me to a client meeting. I had never worked with that client before. And I asked him, like, what am I supposed to do here? And he goes, just sit in the room. And then after the meeting, he tells me, there's something about you being in a room that everybody laughs. You will say something that makes everybody laugh, and then the meeting goes better. And I didn't realize this about myself until he said that to me, that yes, I have this urge where we're sitting around for 15 minutes and nobody's laughing. Something is wrong. I got to crack something that makes people laugh and
I'm the
and, and
same
make
way.
things better for everybody, right? So definitely, laughter is a huge relief for everybody. It's the best medicine, apparently, right? So
I
Yeah.
it
saw
does help us deal with everything that happens in our lives.
Yeah.
I saw a comment says Mexicans make fun of everything, and it's so true. I mean, because out of this, especially in Mexico, where people are poor, and have less resources, and death is around them all the time. They tend to make fun of all this stuff. We our culture, right away that even our nicknames, like if you're a handicap, your nickname's going to be something, inappropriate, but you
Brutal.
just take it on. But everyone's accepts it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
If
I
you're
think that's the
fine, they'll
universal
give
truth
you
as
they'll
well.
give you there's no politically correctness in Mexico in that sense that it's just a way of dealing with hardship and struggle.
Yeah.
And when someone dies, yeah, they're gonna make jokes about him. 2 days later.
Yeah.
You know.
And a
Yeah.
lot of it also is perspective. If you come from an immigrant culture, if you come from, a community of color, what's your perspective? It's not looking down, you're looking up and you're looking
Yes.
and so you're naturally in a satirical position to prick the balloons that are floating
Yes.
above you. And
Right.
in terms of helping understand the situation, like you see like Venezuela, right? I tell a joke about how it's all lies, right? About, oh, it's the drugs or it's the fentanyl or it's the blood for
Yeah.
oil. And then I say, of the the United States is in it because they're number two, tied with the first colony, the Philippines, at number two for the number of major beauty queen winners. And who's number one? It's Venezuela. Venezuela's number one. This is blood for beauty queens. It's blood for beauty queens. And it's silly, but it's also factual. And it also talks about the lies because that lie is as good as any other lie that got us into the Venezuelan war, the Venezuelan conflict.
It makes
And
sense
Yeah.
that's
for
humor.
Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And
It
that's
makes sense
humor.
for Donald Trump to like the beauty queen.
And
Yeah.
one quick point to mention, Herbert, you're right. I've seen this with every culture. Like you hear Iranic comics, hilarious. You hear Filipino comics, hilarious. You hear Indian, like every culture has that quirk of making fun of everything within. And to me, to some extent, especially as somebody who's here as a first-gen immigrant coming from the outside, America is actually the pinnacle. This is the mecca of stand-up. This is where stand-up was born.
Hmm?
So
Yeah.
America is the forebearer of this whole idea of say what you think, fearless,
Yes.
making jokes about everything. There's almost no other country that's as free as America in terms of making fun of anybody and everything. Like, look at what's happening in India right now with the political climate, especially.
Hmm.
The right-wing Modi government is definitely not the one with a sense of humor, right? And it's the same things that is happening in different parts of the world. So I completely agree that every culture has its own quirk. And that's what I find universally connecting everybody is. I don't find one culture which is not funny. I've heard
Right.
comedians from all kinds of backgrounds, whether it's ethnicity, sexuality, gender, race, everybody's funny.
And that's
We
why
just
I
have
get really
voices
upset
that
with,
come up.
and that's why I was really upset when, especially during the woke era, where they were really not just Chappelle, but everybody, even Culture Clash, they were like saying, "Oh no," because if you know our work, we do different ethnicities. We'll play black people, we'll play women, we play trans, it's just three guys, Latino guys. So we're not going to hire every specific character. We do all the characters. But, people were coming up to us saying, no, you can't do women anymore. No, you can't do gay guys anymore because you're not gay. You can't do, what I'm saying? So it's becoming really, we felt totally censored from our
Yeah,
own, our own style of comedy, and, it's ancient, guys getting into dresses is ancient.
Yeah.
absolutely.
But
And then
this is
suddenly it's off limits now because a few people just had were offended by it.
but this is the thing now that people talk about in comedy what you can, what you can't talk about, and now there are right-wing comedians and left-wing comedians,
Mhm.
so that there are woke and anti-woke comedians, and
Yes,
it's really it's you got to find your audience. But I worry about this is why as a journalist I always fall back on I don't need the laughs because I'm a journalist and I can just tell the truth as it is. I don't need the laugh. But when I'm in a comedy club and I'm in that kind of setting, I'm looking for the laughs, and it
sure.
sometimes it changes me, and sometimes I will I'll try to break that censorship, and I'll try to say what I really feel. It's like what Samson was saying earlier. You're a comedian, you have a perspective and a viewpoint that you want to share, and it ends with a punchline. It always ends with a curly cue, as Sid Caesar would say, because we're trying to make the joke. But sometimes the truth is just the news. The news is the setup and trying to find the punchline. Sometimes the setup is the punchline. Sometimes the emotion, and sometimes the funniness, like Chrissy Nome, getting fired yesterday. So I was thinking, oh, well, they're going to nominate Marquane Mullen. So I wonder how good he looks in false eyelashes and Botox lips.
Mhm.
So, because that's the new uniform of
Yeah,
the chief of the
this yeah,
DHS,
it's Chick-fil-A hiring.
Chick-fil-A. Right.
Oh, I
So,
know the word.
and then I thought, oh well, Marquane Mullen, he's a plumber and doesn't know, he's a small business owner. No disrespect for plumbers, but this is another example of Donald Trump's white affirmative action.
Yeah.
The least qualified in one of the most important positions.
Yes.
There's a better joke in there somewhere, but that's their comedian's response, right, to the news. Sometimes when
Okay. There's a question in the chat by Araceli from La Opinión. Araceli, do you want to ask your question?
Hello, hello, Pilar. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I was wondering if, under the current circumstances, when we are seeing a lot of immigrant families suffering, when we are seeing immigrants dying in ICE custody, how can you make jokes of immigration without being insensitive?
Great question. Great question. I'd like to answer that. Being Latino, uh, I qualify. No, you know what? I personally don't deal with it. You're right. It's so painful. It's so real. It's so personal. I can't make fun of it. I can't. I can't think of jokes that will alleviate or make fun of or get laughter out of that theme. It's just so dark. It's like making it's like death camp jokes. Like they're just not going to go over, right? And it's this is one instance where I think society's been so dark lately. This administration has been so outrageous, so unreal that I can't put my finger on it as a comic. There's just some subjects that I just won't go there.
See, I think
That's interesting.
you should dare to try to go there. Although I understand, look, I know some of the things, what ICE has done, uh, but I think there's something that at least can recalibrate, to get you out of despair and because comedy will get you to hope and optimism. And if some way we take the setup and put that curly Q punchline that gives us the recalibration so we can go down the path of optimism and hope, I think we got to try, because only the comedians and the satirists are really it's their responsibility, because most people will go down that path of despair, And I know that as a journalist, someone asked, what about your credibility as a journalist if you make fun? If I make fun, it just shows I have more insight than people who are, straight and don't see the possibilities. And if I break it down, like Samson says, the joke is the most simplest narrative because it gets that involuntary laugh, right? The involuntary laugh is it's the holy grail. Someone farts and there's an involuntary laugh, right? I say something involuntary. That's why if humor is so subjective, maybe the point is, like, I'm a certified laughter yogi, and the point there is the intentional laugh, and just to laugh at everything. 15 seconds for world peace. Laugh at everything. And that gets the endorphins and the serotonin and the dopamine going. And you are in a better place than you were when you got the news. I'd say you can turn off the news, but I'd be upsetting all the journalists here. Don't turn off the news. But approach
Don't want
life
to sometimes.
with that laugh, with that with that intentional laughter that'll reset and
Yeah, it's just
recalibrate.
when I see
I'll just
federal officers taking people out of their cars, out of their homes,
Yeah.
and separating their kids, it's like, okay, wow, where do how do I make a joke about that?
I think I'll just add one little thing. It's also not every comedian talks about everything that happens. So comedians have their own picks about what they want to talk about, and everybody has their own style. So it's hard for somebody to come up to me and be like, hey, this is what's happening in India with Indians in America, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you talk about this?
Yeah.
I will if I have something to say, but if I don't have anything funny, so I'm not saying it, and for various reasons. So I completely agree with Herbert and Emil.
Yeah, we all have our
It's
style.
subjective,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
then
yeah. Good.
I also see
I mean,
somebody said, are comedians more free to touch on politics compared to other people? I've also said this a lot to a lot of people. All of us are funny. Only some of us are desperate for attention. That's why we go up on stage and tell jokes. So I don't think it's just the comics who talk about politics. We all talk about it in our own ways. So
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, look, like I was saying, there's something strange about wanting to do comedy where you're in the dark, in public, talking to strangers and asking them for their love. And that's another an hour that we have to do. Maybe
Okay.
in a
There's nothing
psychiatric
worse.
setting.
There's nothing worse than bad political comedy. That's another thing. Like,
Yeah.
you might be
bad
Well,
political,
comedy.
but if it's not, funny, it's just the worst
Yeah.
comedy ever,
that depends on if you're a Democrat or a Republican, I guess.
Sometimes the politics is worse than the bad
Yeah.
comedy.
Well, you
Okay.
just don't want to be, you just don't want to be hammered over the head with bad news. Also, you got to
Yeah.
find something out
I
of it.
think that's also a thing that I have seen at some of the shows, right? Where I'm in the middle of my performance on stage and somebody from the crowd goes, oh, this just happened. Why don't you talk about it? And it's almost like, wait, this isn't a Q&A or people are here. And what I also saw that day was very telling, because there were other people shutting this person down,
Yeah.
saying, look, there's a lot of shit going on in the world. You don't have to bring it inside a comedy show. We are here to get away from it. This is our relief. This is our recharge. This is our way to deal with things that are happening outside and be like, we're still human and connect. We go back out and we'll deal with that again. So you don't have to bring everything that happens in the world on stage all the time. Sometimes people actually appreciate not talking about the current news at all, because there's just too much going on. And you just come and say silly shit. And everybody's like, oh, this is so good because we are talking about things that don't address what's going in the world.
I get that. I get that a lot too. You said, oh, we don't want to hear about Trump. I said, really? From a Filipino perspective, you wouldn't want to hear what I have to, but I think, that's where we have different styles, and you got to be glad that there's a guy who does that and a guy who does that, and a woman who does that. Diversity.
I mean, if that happens where you have 5 comedians back to back to back talking about the same thing, by the 6th one, you're like, okay, I'm done. Anything more, and I have no patience anymore. So agreed.
Hey guys, there's a question here in the chat. Irene Diaz she asked me to ask the question, but she says, in some Latino communities, people joke about the English accent of public figures like Melania Trump. Can humor help us process cultural and political differences, or does it also risk reinforcing stereotypes? Can we joke about Melania Trump's accent?
If
I
you're
mean, I have an
Melania,
Can we
accent,
joke
so.
about it? Yes. How can we joke about is the challenging part, right? Like people can do off-color jokes and mean-spirited jokes, or they can do really smart, funny things. And you can tell the difference very easily because when the joke is said, it either makes you cringe or it makes you laugh. And if it makes you laugh, then it was a good written joke.
Good joke, yeah.
And if
Yeah.
it doesn't make you laugh, then it's a bad joke. It's pretty black and white with jokes, actually.
well, I said when I get up, sometimes I'll say thank you for coming to the show. I know you have so many choices. You could have seen the Melania documentary. Okay. And
Oh, yeah.
sometimes it gets a reaction.
There's
Yeah.
I
another
didn't
interesting
make fun
question
of
in
her
the
accent though.
yeah, there's another
Okay.
interesting question in the chat, Pilar, about is
Yes.
it true that comedians laugh to keep from crying? And I think yes.
Yes.
Uh, I've heard this from a lot of senior comics of mine, like comedy is free therapy. And even for the comedian, there's stuff going on in their life that they're trying to figure out and deal with. And one of the simplest things I know is when you have marital battles, and I make a reference to it on stage and I joke about it, and other people laugh. And it's like, oh, so I'm not the only one going through this in the world. And suddenly the pain is lessened. If I'm having a kid acting certain way and I make a joke about it and other people laugh, it's like, oh, it's not just my kid who's this way. It's a universal thing. That's the whole connection
Recognition.
piece, right? Yes. So you suddenly feel like the joy is shared, the sorrow is shared, it becomes easier and better. So absolutely. Comedians, or to say this, are sad people.
Jeez. All right.
I agree.
We only have 3 minutes left. Yeah, I don't have a final question right now for all of you that makes sense after all of this. But maybe you guys can make a last comment about whether you feel what you do means something to people, means something for the world. You know, it achieves something.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. One of the biggest differences I've noticed was when I started doing comedy, there was a lot of American-born Indian comedians joking about the Indian experience from their perspective. And then when I started doing stand-up, what I found was the parents of these comedians found me funnier because I'm speaking their voice, I'm speaking their
Mm.
experiences. And a lot of the immigrant communities would come up to me and say, like, oh, you're talking as an outsider looking in, that makes more sense to us. And to me, that was a very empowering thing where, like we said before, the Indian kids making fun of Indian parents' accents and English. And I'm sitting here going, that is so cheesy and so done and so basic. There's more to it. And then I come back punching those kids down and making fun of American accents because a very basic joke I had done years ago was how somebody said, oh, you have an accent. Where are you from? And I said, I am from the part of the world where 1 billion people think you have an accent. Because we all have accents, right? And so that equalizer is kind of voicing some of the people who don't have that voice or the platform. So they feel very empowered and encouraged, like, oh, somebody says out loud what we feel inside. And that's the big relief and the big laugh that comes. So absolutely. I think doing comedy in your own original way, there's always people that you are speaking for who are the ones who laugh the loudest with you.
In India, when people call in India when they call for service, company service, do they get called? Do they get routed to Kentucky? You know,
You know,
Yeah.
there's a joke
uh,
there somewhere.
Yeah.
they,
Hey,
they actually get routed to Eastern Europe. There's a lot of offshoring that's
Oh,
going
okay,
from
yeah.
India to Eastern Europe.
no, they're in the Philippines now, and that's
Oh,
how I know.
really?
Also,
And that's how I know I pronounce my name because they say, "Oh, Mr. Guillermo." I say, "You're my
Uh-oh.
confirmation. It's Guillermo." Hey,
Okay.
I just want to leave people here with this idea of the intentional laugh. 15 seconds for world peace. Just just laughing. Yeah, you don't have to rely on the joke. You don't have to rely on a good comedian, a bad comedian. You just and you'll feel good. Just 15 seconds, you'll feel good.
Imagine if we all laughed at the same time worldwide. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole idea of laughter yoga. To laugh. So if we did it now, just to laugh off Pilar. It just feels better. Anyway,
That was
thanks.
awesome. Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Lord.
That was really good. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the great questions, and thank you for all the panelists that share their time with us. I love
Thanks
you
for
guys.
having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Samson. Thanks, Herbert.
Bye,
Have a
guys.
happy day, everybody.